I tried to warn them. I really did. I told the Aspen Peak Estates Board that the ridge behind my land wasn't just dirt. It was the very spine that held our whole neighborhood together. But they just laughed. They called me Mr. Doom and Gloom, and then they slapped me with a $700 fine just for opening my mouth. A week later, the bulldozers arrived and started carving a scar straight through the mountain, and when the heavy rains came, the mountain split and hell came down the hill. You get a certain kind of quiet when you live where the foothills meet the sky. It's not the absence of sound. No, it's deeper, like a low, slow breath. After 20 years as a combat engineer in the Marines, that silence was the only thing that felt real. When I moved to Aspen Peak 6 years ago, after losing my wife, I came to my grandfather's old cabin. He built it in the 70s with his own hands, right where the grass gives way to the first steep rise. He called it the mountain's front porch, and he was right. You sit on that back deck long enough, and you feel the ridge watching you, old and patient. I respected that mountain like it was my commanding officer. Its layers, its scars, its fractures. I read them the way I used to read a topo map in Afghanistan, looking for the soft spots, the weaknesses you never ignore. So I lived simply, fixing the deck, clearing the natural runoff channels, growing tomatoes, and mostly keeping to myself, just trying to enjoy that quiet. When I first moved in, the HOA was harmless. They cared about paved roads and keeping the gate code current. But last spring, everything changed. A new board president, a woman named Blair Thorne, blew in like a Santa Ana wind. She was sharp-featured, always dressed like she was about to close a 7-figure deal. And she spoke in buzzwords, not sentences, maximizing potential, vision, lifestyle enhancement. She didn't care about roots or natural rock formations. She cared about curb appeal. One Saturday morning, a glossy, embossed brochure showed up in my mailbox. The Apex Trail Experience, Nature Meets Luxury. It was filled with renderings of yoga platforms and scenic overlooks carved right into the ridge, right behind my property line. I stood in my backyard with that pamphlet and a cold coffee, staring up at the fresh, bright pink ribbons tied to the boulders. Survey markers. It had begun. Not one letter, not one knock on the door. Even though my parcel bordered the precise area they were planning to tear apart at first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they'd stop at the edge. Maybe they'd realize that ridge wasn't just dirt. But I knew better. It was brittle, layered limestone and clay, a geological nightmare in a wet season. I'd seen what happened to slopes like that when the pressure changed. I'd seen men buried alive because some lieutenant thought he could save a day by shortcutting a hillside. But maybe doesn't mean much when the diesel engine started up. 2 weeks after the pamphlet, the noise hit. It was a Tuesday. I walked up the old gravel path and found a crew of 5 reflective vests, and a crew chief in a polo shirt pointing wildly at a tablet. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying that old parade ground projection. They turned, and the crew chief, a smug guy named Vance, raised his sunglasses. I told him who I was, where my land ran, and that I needed to see the permits, the drainage plans, the geological survey. He blinked, then gave me a smile that held all the warmth of wet stone. "This has all been approved, sir. Board and Planning Committee. It's going to raise your property value." I tried to keep it clinical. I told him that ridge was unstable, that if they cut the wrong layers, water wouldn't run off, it would sink. It would swell, and every single storm would drive it deeper into failure. He shrugged. "We've consulted professionals." I didn't bother asking what kind. The kind who get paid to say yes. That night, I didn't sleep. I pulled out my grandfather's old aerial maps and cross-referenced them with the county's archived geological records. I wrote my first letter, not just to the HOA, but to the county engineering office, copying the city council. The replies were slow, vague, and useless. "Your concern has been noted. This falls under HOA jurisdiction." All the while, the digging crept closer. That ridge, for decades, had been a natural dam, holding back runoff and absorbing the shock of storms. Now, they were slicing through its spine like it was just another landscaping job. I started filming everything, every truck, every cut, every time the ground trembled. I watched the trees lean. I knew what was coming. They didn't, and they wouldn't listen, not yet. Blair Thorne and her VP, Kent, a lawyer who wore custom suits and talked about unlocking the ridge's asset potential, were relentless. At the community meeting where they unveiled the final renderings, I sat in the back row, my arms crossed. Blair stood there with that practiced, dazzling smile, talking about gentle slopes and environmentally conscious materials. I raised my hand. Has a geological study been done? A real one, not a developer summary. Blair paused, a micro-expression of annoyance flashing across her face. "We've had topographical scans, Mr. Carter. The contractor assures us the area is safe." "Topography is not geology," I corrected, my voice flat. "Do you have a slope stability report? Shear strength tests? Seasonal water table analysis?" Kent leaned forward from his chair, a smirk pulling at his mouth. "Sir, with all due respect, are you a certified engineer?" I looked straight at him. "I served 20 years as a field engineer in the U.S. Marines. I've assessed slope stability on 4 continents, including places where landslides kill people every year because someone thought a ridge was just dirt. A kind of oily silence spread through the room. Blair recovered quickly. "We appreciate your service, Mr. Carter, but this isn't a war zone. We're talking about enhancing nature." The meeting ended with awkward claps and one elderly neighbor whispering that I should calm down. I already knew what was coming. 2 days later, the HOA posted a community update. Trail Phase 1 approved. Breaking ground in 2 weeks, no mention of my reports. Just a smiling stock photo of someone jogging near a pristine trail. The next weekend, I found Blair and Kent walking the upper ridgeline with a few contractors. I trailed them, my camera ready. Kent peeled off and walked toward me. "You're not allowed up here, Carter. This is HOA project land. That ridge borders my property line." I pointed behind me. "I have every right to be here." "Then stay on your side. Don't interfere." He stepped closer. "Do you even know what you're cutting into?" I asked him. "Do you know what happens when a karst ridge collapses from hydro pressure?" He scoffed. "You're trying to scare people with science fiction." "No," I said, holding his gaze. "I'm trying to keep you from killing someone." His smirk vanished for just a second, replaced by something dark, but he just turned and walked away. Within the week, the equipment arrived: bulldozers, jackhammers, survey drones. They had signed a fast-track agreement with a firm known more for building tiered golf courses than safe trail systems. I filed a second report to the city, complete with drone photos and references to geological studies. I included weather data showing increased storm activity. Still nothing. The city deferred to the HOA, but one neighbor, an older lady named Sylvie, cornered me while I was trimming junipers. "I saw your post about the soil, Mr. Carter." I tried to speak up too, but Kent said if we kept spreading misinformation, they'd fine us for non-compliance. He threatened her. That night, I started the real fight. I posted everything: images, geological citations, anonymous warnings on a public local forum outside the HOA's control. It got traction. A few grad students chimed in. I was preparing for a war without bullets because if they were going to slice the mountain's spine, I was going to make sure the world knew who held the saw. A week after the excavation began, the first hairline crack appeared on the lower slope, barely 2 inches wide. Every morning I walked the perimeter with a notepad and measuring tape, marking the distances, photographing trees leaning at new angles, listening for the subtle groans of the earth. I knew the signs. I'd seen them halfway around the world. The quiet pressure building until one storm is all it takes. The HOA ignored it all. They used vibrating compactors directly against raw, fractured limestone, creating microfissures they couldn't see. They were attacking an ancient structure with total ignorance. I paid out of pocket for an independent soil technician to take core samples. His report was blunt: high risk of soil liquefaction under excessive saturation. Halt excavation immediately. I mailed copies to every single board member by certified post. The response: a formal HOA notice taped to my door, demanding I cease disrupting community cohesion and threatening fines again. I laughed when I read it. Then I set it down and started building my official case file. I wasn't some old crank yelling at the clouds. I was building a chain of custody. If that mountain came down, I wanted the paper trail to lead straight to the HOA boardroom. One evening, I heard a strange, low creaking sound, like a cello string pulling too tight. I went up with a flashlight. The crack had widened, snaking toward the runoff gully. The soil had slumped slightly. I called the city again, demanding a risk mitigation officer. A junior staffer named Reed seemed sympathetic, but his final word was the same: it's difficult when it's private land managed under an HOA. That phrase: a shield and a sword, all in one, exempt from oversight, yet empowered to override the voices of the people who live under it. It was the third week of July when the real tearing began. Up until then, it had been light clearing. Now, they brought in the heavy machines, the ones that rumble so deep you feel it in your ribs. I watched from my deck as the excavators ripped through the ridgeline. What was once a solid green spine of stone and root became an open, raw wound. They weren't just digging a trail. They carved a trench, nearly 12 feet wide, slicing right into the midpoint of the slope. The earth beneath that trail had been an interlocked system of roots, sediment, and caprock, all holding each other in tension. Once those layers were severed, it became a Jenga tower with half its pieces pulled out. I could see the slope deforming in real time. Trees along the edge began to lean, not enough for the crews to notice, but enough for me. Their root anchors were gone. I tried one last time. I flagged down a young contractor, maybe 25, sweating through his vest. "Do you know what you're cutting through?" I asked him. "Has anyone told you this ridge is karsted? That's limestone with hollow pockets. The wrong pressure, and it collapses." He looked nervous. "I just run the machine, sir." The HOA doubled down. Blair posted a new memo, protecting our vision, dispelling fear. She called my reports exaggerated interpretations from outdated data. She wrote, and I quote, "The mountain has stood for thousands of years. A walking trail will not bring it down." It made me sick because I'd seen it before. In Bosnia, in Pakistan, hillsides that had stood for millennia until someone carved too deep, too fast, too carelessly. Then came the rain, the weight, and the roar. I climbed up after the crews left and ran my fingers across the cut. It crumbled, saturated and loose, like a sandcastle left along under the waves. I knew what would happen if I was right. I also knew what would happen if I was wrong. Either way, I had to be ready. I spent the next few days knocking on doors face to face. I showed them diagrams, my annotated reports pointing to the ridge behind their homes. "Do you feel safe right now?" I asked. Some brushed me off, but a few stayed people like Bethany, a single mother who said her toddler was waking up crying, or Lenny, a retired fire marshal who could smell the moisture seeping through his foundation. We started meeting in secret in garages, over kitchen tables, away from the HOA's listening ears. We formed the Peak Watch. We pulled funds and hired a second independent geologist from a university 4 counties away. No HOA ties, no developer contracts. He mapped the subsurface with ground-penetrating radar, and when he finished, he shook his head slowly. "This cut exposed to buried sink channels," he said. "One good rainfall, and the weight of the ridge above collapses inward." His final report included the words, "imminent slope failure, 3 days of forecasts. Nothing major, just summer thunderstorms." But the ridge was already saturated. We all knew it. The moment that rain began to fall, steady and heavy, the tension in the air became unbearable. I stayed up all night, watching the streak on the glass, finding a new creek wider, deeper, running through the deer trail bordering my eastern fence. By noon the third day, the air felt charged. The ridge wasn't groaning anymore. It was holding its breath. Diego texted me, "Something's wrong. Ground's vibrating." Lenny reported seeing his fence posts lean inward, toward the ridge, as if pulled by gravity. And still, not a single alert from the HOA. Silence. They were hiding, or pretending it wasn't happening. Then, around 2:17 p.m., a deep, low-frequency sound hit my chest like a wave. It wasn't thunder. It was lower, deeper, like the earth itself had inhaled and then exhaled in violence. It began with a shudder that rattled the foundation of my house. Then came the roar, a slow, escalating train coming out of the ridge itself. I ran outside. From the crest of the trench came a plume of dust and shattered stone. The waterlogged, fractured upper slope gave way with the inevitability of gravity. The mountain didn't crumble, it split. The crack I'd been tracking exploded into a yawning chasm, and the entire face of the ridge collapsed in on itself. A slow, terrifying wall of mudstone, uprooted trees and broken timbers slid downward. The trench had acted like a gutter, guiding the collapse straight into the neighborhood below. I stood paralyzed, watching the torrent devour the newly paved scenic trail, rip through Blair Thorne's backyard fence, and crash into the cul-de-sac with a violence that no PowerPoint diagram had ever accounted for. Sirens, distant at first, then closer. I grabbed my go-bag and sprinted toward the nearest affected homes. At 3:04 p.m., the city finally sent its first emergency alert. Landslide emergency. Evacuate. Too late. The HOA clubhouse, built just under the ridge's curve, was hit full on. The glass-walled fitness center wiped out. The cameras I'd installed captured the moment it went down. When the sheriff's deputies came knocking, I was standing outside with a printed packet in my hand, my documentation binder. This wasn't a surprise, I told the sheriff. It was a countdown. He just looked at the packet, then at the smoking ridge, and nodded. They found Kent's custom SUV buried under 6 feet of mud. He hadn't made it out. They pulled Blair from the wreckage of her sunroom at 3 a.m., alive, but whispering something no one could understand. She would later claim she had no idea. But I had the emails. I had the footage. I had everything. The headlines were brutal. HOA approved, trail project triggers catastrophic. Landslide, ignored warnings. The story went national. I wasn't relieved. I was angry, because none of this had to happen. They hadn't just gambled with money. They had gambled with land, with lives, and they lost. When the news teams swarmed, they found me. I stood beside the broken tree line with 3 microphones pointed at me, and I told the truth. I showed them the cease and desist letters, the geological reports, the internal communications denying any risk. As I spoke, something inside me settled. I wasn't fighting the HOA anymore. I was testifying for the land. That afternoon, state geological investigators arrived. Dr. Tran, the lead, shook my hand firmly. "I read your reports, Mr. Carter," she said. "You were right. The trench destabilized the subsurface entirely." She confirmed the trench had intersected 2 old solution channels. The prolonged rainfall filled those cavities, creating internal pressure that cracked the ridge like an eggshell. 2 days later, I was called into the command tent. Federal agents were there. "Mr. Carter," one agent said, "we've got reason to believe the HOA board falsified key portions of their construction permit. They intentionally concealed a negative engineering report and hired an unlicensed contractor under a shell firm. That's criminal negligence." I felt my breath catch. This is now federal. That night, I posted a statement on the neighborhood's backup forum. "The mountain warned us." I tried to warn them. But now that the worst has happened, let the record show this wasn't an accident. This was the result of arrogance, lies, and willful blindness. And we will not be silent anymore. It went viral. The most profound shift came the next morning. Not from officials, but from my neighbors. One by one, they came to my door, tired, shaken, some still in muddy clothes. You were right. I'm sorry I didn't listen. Thank you. The old HOA structure was gone. The bank accounts frozen. No one wanted the old way back. We started meeting weekly in the church basement, reviewing safety protocols, discussing land use. We didn't call it a homeowners association anymore. We called it a council. Everyone's invited. No one's fined for leaving a trash bin out. Bethany Cruz chairs the safety subcommittee now. Lenny runs the prep workshops. Diego helped us negotiate new flood insurance packages. And me, they call me the Ridge Steward. It's not official, but it's understood. Whenever something needs to be checked, soil levels, runoff flows, slope integrity, they call me. Not because I hold authority, but because I held the line when no one else wanted to. Because I listened to the mountain when others turned away. The civil suits are stacking up fast. Blair is expected to plead out. I won't be in the courtroom. I've done my part. But last week, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, for words, no punctuation. You were right. I'm sorry. No signature. I folded it gently and placed it in the back of the binder, not for pride, but as proof that even people who lose their way might someday find the courage to whisper the truth. It's been 7 months. I still wake up sometimes, expecting to hear the groan of machinery, but the land has gone quiet again, the stillness of something slowly healing. The mountain hasn't forgotten. You can see it in the scars that remain, the jagged indentation where the old trail was supposed to be. They've fenced off the entire ridge, planting erosion netting and native growth. But no matter how carefully they plant, you can still feel it, the memory of what we let happen. I walked up to the edge last weekend. I brought a small stone with me, one I picked up the very first day the machines arrived. I placed it gently into the soil beneath a young cedar sapling that's just taking root. A kind of promise. We won't forget what was lost here, the homes, the peace, the trust. But neither will we forget what we reclaimed, our voice, our duty to one another, and a lesson the mountain taught us, not with fury, but with consequence. It wasn't just dirt. It was history. It was a warning. It was home. Call to action. What do you think is the deeper reason people like Blair and Kent ignore common sense and geological fact for profit? Was their ponies